Welcome to Resilience Talk, hosted by Paul Spencer of Second Nature Solutions. Let's dive in.
I got a lot of comments recently around the topic of Deming and his concept of reducing to one supplier and building a deep relationship and have that long-term trust and loyalty. And that kind of sparked something in a few of you. So it's a lot of fun. I've also learned that when there, it's not necessarily a controversy, but when you guys want to kind of banter on some of the topics, you do it to me personally, right? So it's not on social media. It's not on LinkedIn. It's not on any of the posts. You send me a note, which is, I love that. I think it's perfect. And I reflect on that a little bit. And I always wonder about the folks that we know, right? Let's use Trump and Elon when they had a falling out over Twitter or X. Sorry, I should say X. It's very interesting to me just to think about, would I ever have those types of words or that type of, say, argument or discussion with somebody on a public forum so everybody can watch, and then have it just go down into name calling, and it's just very interesting. So anyway, I'm not saying that you guys or we're devolving into our conversations in the name calling, but it is fun to hear from you. So keep sending me notes, keep giving me some insights into how you're thinking. And I think all of your points are valid. So a lot of you some of you are confirming. Some of you have a little bit of yeah buts. And then there was one or two of you that were very adamant that tend to disagree with the concept of a single supplier. And you had lots of examples. And we have recent examples, right? With the COVID supply chain issues, the recent turmoil that we have now is an outcome of a lot of that happened in 2020 with the supply chain issues that we had mostly with China. And what does that mean to reshore? Right? How do we reshore? How do we get more supply chain locally? How do we get more fault tolerant? So I agree with all of that. And I think it's a fun discussion to say that everything that we talk about, there is a dichotomy to everything. So our world is full of a dichotomy, right? We could say, at one hand, our principle is this, but on the other hand, it's also this, right? The yin and the yang. And those two things could be true at the same time. And going back to what we were talking about the last couple of times is just provocative thoughts, thinking contrarian thoughts, right? All of those things are part of us not just being robots in what we're taught, not taking our MBA, not taking the status quo, the established ways of doing things, and just doing it that way, right? What I'm after is for us to think a little differently. We may come to a similar or the same conclusion as what we would say the established traditional way, but the way we get there is different because our thinking is different. That's the whole point. So is Deming correct in saying that we should end the practice of awarding business on the basis of the price tag? Well, you tell me. You tell me. You are in business. You have customers. And if your customers say, too expensive for me, could you cut that by 20%? Could you cut it by 30%? What are you going to say? What are you going to say? I think you'll say, geez, let's not just look at it at the price point. Let's look at these other factors that we provide. Let's look at the value we bring, right? So Deming is correct in that. And then the follow-on to that is, instead of on basis of price tag, on price, let's maximize total cost, which is moving toward a single supplier for any one item, right? Build that relationship, build long-term loyalty and trust. So does that mean that we could have some risk? Yeah, we talked about that last time. We could incur some risk by doing that. When we talk about the unknown unknowns and the unknowables and the data with all of that, that still applies to all of this, right? So anyway, I think that's very interesting. The dichotomy is good. Somebody mentioned to me a set of books. Now, Brandon, who normally does the tag team with me, you guys all know who he is. He suggested to me, and I have these books. It's basically the Great Mental Models by Shane Parrish, and so there's 4 books in there. And so somebody even mentioned that Shane Parrish mentions, what did he call it? They call it Interdependence in one of the books. And so I went through it, and you know what? I've had these books forever, and I've never read them. I'm a little bit like my dad. I just buy a bunch of things, and then I keep them in a box, and then I never read them. That's a shout out to Dad. So anyway, this one's the 4th volume, and it's around the economics section. And so there's a part in here about interdependence, which somebody mentioned that said, hey, some of the things that you're talking about are some of the things that Shane Parrish was talking about. So I opened it up and was taking a look at it. Very interesting because it's probably that chapter. It's very concise writing, very, very cool. If you haven't picked it up, it's a good little set of books and set of principles that are fun to read, especially for maybe for some of us these might be like duh, right? We've read these and we know these, but there's some cool things in here around physics and chemistry, biology. It's just fun. Anyway, the Interdependence is probably 5-6 pages. It's not very long, but when I read through it, it states everything that Deming's talking about. So, not going to name names, but the person that sent me that, I think, was using it as a counter to Deming, and I'll need to follow up with you and make sure that I'm right in that. He does state the dichotomy in there for sure. But by the time you get to the end, it's the same. He's saying the same thing as Deming. So I want to talk through that a little bit. And then there's another cool thing in here called I Pencil, which is an essay that was written in 1958, which I'd never heard of before, and it's really cool. So anyway, I wanted to read some of the things that are in here, and really what he's getting at, and he's just summarizing known principles. He's not reinventing anything. It's not an invention of things. It's got great references, bibliography. So anyway, this is just the introduction. It says, specialization leads to interdependence, which is exactly what we just talked about. A supplier for each item, for one item, right? That's specialization. And if we get a deep specialization, then in order to survive, you have to have multiple businesses, multiple specializations within your ecosystem, right? Because you can't do it all. So I'm going to read this. The more specialized an individual, company, nation, or any other group is, the more reliant it must be on other specialists in order to meet its needs, right? We can't do everything on our own. Yeah, exactly. And I think that it speaks exactly into Deming's SOPK, which is the awareness of the system, is that we're all intertwined, interconnected, which is what this whole chapter is called interdependence. So because we're specialized, we are therefore interdependent. And so, again, just kind of repeat myself, when we have an awareness of the system and we understand the interdependence between us and our competitors and our suppliers and the world economy, the world supply chain, the government, right? All those things that are around us, we have better insight into how to make decisions and why things are happening and how to make different processes to be able to handle those different, what we would call imposed inputs. Those are things we can't control, right? The imposed inputs, they're forced on us, and we have to deal with them. But we build our processes around those constraints, just like when we talk about with the theory of constraints, which is also awesome theory. So then he mentions the iPencil, which I had never heard of, essay. And then I want to read this too. So even such a simple device involves numerous specialists. So there's loggers to harvest the wood, workers in a sawmill to cut it, designers of machines used to work on the wood, so on and so on and so on and so on. And it's a very, very fun topic. I think it's a fun topic. So I pulled up the essay, and you can just search for it. It's called I, Pencil, meaning my name is Pencil. And it reads as, he writes it as my family tree, right? Kind of a play on words and everything, and it's his genealogy of how he exists and everything. And I highlighted this because we've talked about this before, is I have a profound lesson to teach because I am seemingly so simple. And then it says, simple? Yet not a single person on the face of this earth knows how to make me. This sounds fantastic, doesn't it? Especially when it is realized that there are about 1 and 1.5 billion of my kind produced in the U.S. every year. And this was written in 1958, right? So this is another thing that we have around simplicity and things that we were just talking about before, which is the quality that we have. When something is and I'll go into the software world. When we build something from a software perspective, of course, there's the code, there's the tech debt, there's the data, there's all the things, there's the architecture underneath, all of those things. Those are all hidden. You don't know what those are. You don't understand the quality of that, but you understand the quality of the interaction. And so when you interact with a piece of software, you have an understanding of its quality, right? And at this point in time in our world of software development and product development is we don't tolerate errors. So maybe 20 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, if something failed, meaning you got an error or it didn't quite load right, or maybe it did something you didn't quite expect and you're a little confused, we tended to tolerate those things a little more because that's just what the environment was. Today, we're in a much more mature and commoditized software environment that if anything failed in that way, nobody's going to tolerate that, and you will lose customers, right? So that whole interaction design is super important in today's world if you're building software products. Because the customer has low tolerance. It's a commodity. They expect it to work. If you grabbed a pencil, right? I still use pencils. Look at that. If I grabbed this pencil and it broke in my hand or wouldn't sharpen or it wouldn't write, and it was not useful to me immediately, like as soon as I went to use it, I would throw it away. I have no tolerance for it, right? Because I expect this to work. It's a commodity. And 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it was still a commodity, right? We expected it to work. So anyway, when we have the interaction design, we have such a high threshold of a low threshold of tolerance that quality is expected, right? So anyway, it's something interesting to be thinking about. And when we talk about the simple solution, because in the iPencil, right, he's talking about it's being simple. I am simple, but seemingly I'm not. That is when you have high quality. That's kind of the litmus test. So going back to the software piece is when we use Google, and you've heard me use this example many times, but when you go into Google, and now we don't really go to Google anymore. We just type into the browser and type what we're looking for, right? Our search. But at one point, Google you went to the Google.com, right? And there was one input box. And then you would type in there whatever you're looking for, and then you hit enter. That is simple, right? Seemingly simple. What's underneath there, and kind of from the pencil's perspective, all the things it took to be able for you to just type what was the Bengals score from last weekend, for it to go find all that information, pull all that data, do all the algorithms, put it all up, and then bring you 5 pages of HTML documents that you could go look it up, right? Websites that you could go look at that information. Super, super complex, but it's simple. And that means high quality. That is high quality. So when we're building anything, physical, manufacturing, hardware, or fasteners, screws, anything like that, quality is based on the simplicity. The customer just assumes it works. The customer just assumes that, oh yeah, that's easy to make. Like, how hard could it be to make a screw, right? And all of those things, that's what we're looking for. That's what the whole pencil thing is all about. So anyway, I would encourage you to go read it. It's very interesting. And really, in the end, the whole premise, the whole moral to the story is just about how free markets work, right? Open markets, and the need to have specialized interdependence in a market in order to build and innovate and seemingly create simple things. So lots of fun. There's a couple of things else I wanted to talk about. There's a quote inside Shane's book here, and so I wrote these down. When everything works, interdependence works well. When things don't go as planned, however, interdependence starts to shut everything down, which is, we saw that, right? And he wrote these books in 24, so he already had the experience of the 2020 stuff. But it's very common, right? I mean, it makes logical sense. So does that mean that we can't be interdependent and we shouldn't specialize? Well, there's risk. There's risk with everything. And that's the dichotomy. One other thing that I thought was interesting, and I'm going to read this too, because this kind of lays out the unknown unknowables that we had talked about previously. Actually, there's one other thing too in here I'm going to read too. So he's talking about how oil prices went down in the 30s because there was a gluttony of oil wells, and the oil was gushing. And then, so this kind of shows the interdependency of all the things that we were just talking about. And when we read it out loud, it's a big duh. Of course, yeah, that happens. But when we're in our businesses and we're trying to consider what's going on and why are we getting weird results, and how do we move here, or how do we innovate, or how do I get more efficient, and those kinds of things, you really do have to start to look out and look at the big picture and see how things are connected. And that will give you more foresight, more insight, right? You get to iterate on all of that. And then you come to, hopefully, to a better solution, which, again, is just a theory. And then you get to take those theories and see what you can do. So anyway, first oil prices went down all over. And because none of us collected and refined our own oil, there was widespread reaction to the windfall that our dependency created. Homes started to heat with oil instead of coal. Great, because it's cheaper, right? But then employment in coal mines fell, and the price of steel went up, because because coal became more expensive, right? Because coal was going down. We drove our cars more. Railway usage declined. Highways grew. Towns caught in the wrong location or dependent on the wrong resources stagnated or died out, while other towns boomed. New oil produced effects that cascaded far outside the oil industry. This is exactly what Deming was talking about when we were talking about the 7 deadly sins, and when management focuses only on visible figures. He says it in a slightly different way. He says management by use only of visible figures alone, something like that. He kind of turns all the words around, right? And then he goes on to say, with little or no consideration of the figures, meaning the numbers, the data, that is known, unknown, or unknowable. This is a great example of that, right? We look at the oil, we look at oil production, but the cascading effects around that, and we're not worried about the economics of things in our business. Those things will go on our own. But there are consequences of having more production inside our own business to do this, and what effects that's going to have either for our own suppliers or for our own businesses. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. There's one last part in here that is also very interesting here. So interdependence isn't just a macro concept. It's deeply personal. We're all independent with our families, our friends, our communities. We rely on one another for support, for love, for meaning. And interdependence is the fabric of our social lives. He also says interdependence can be both a vulnerability and a strength. So the dichotomy of the world, for us to be thinking and to be aware of these things, we understand that there's lots of variables. How do we reduce our variables? How do we create theories? How do we go and learn? And be aware that there are unknowables, unknown data, unknowables, things we'll never know, right? They're very hard to understand the cascading effects. Rather than just relying, as Deming says, on visible figures alone.